In November 2008, a security guard at the Eclipse Aviation factory stopped the owner of aircraft serial number 260 from taxiing the jet he fully paid for off the ramp. The company had filed for bankruptcy that morning. The owner had the keys, he had the title, he had the receipt, but the guard had orders. Nothing leaves. The fact that an owner is locked out of his own airplane by a company that couldn't afford to let him have it captures everything about the Eclipse story. The Eclipse 500 is a genuinely clever jet, designed by genuinely talented engineers, destroyed by a business plan so detached from reality that even basic transactions stop making sense. The Eclipse 500 was born in 1998, in a world that still believed software could disrupt anything. Its founder, Vern Raburn, had been one of Microsoft's earliest employees. He'd watched the PC revolution from the inside, seen mainframes give way to desktops, seen computing go from something corporations owned to something individuals bought, and seen the people who made that happen get very, very rich. By the late 1990s, he was convinced the same thing was about to happen to aviation. Big corporate jets were the mainframes. Somewhere out there was the desktop equivalent, a tiny mass-produced personal jet, cheap enough to blow the market wide open. And he was going to build it. The airplane he pitched was the Eclipse 500, a 6-seat pressurized twin-engine jet that could cruise at 370 knots at 41,000 feet, burn barely 60 gallons an hour, and sell for under $1 million. That last number, sub $1 million for a certified twin jet, was the headline, and it was the lie at the heart of everything that followed. But Raburn wasn't just pitching an airplane. He was pitching a transport system. The Eclipse 500 was supposed to be the hardware behind a new kind of flying, on-demand, per-seat jet service between thousands of underused GA airports, bypassing the hub-and-spoke airline model entirely. NASA called the concept SATS, Small Aircraft Transportation System. Eclipse called it the future. And the tech investors who'd made their money the same way Raburn had, riding a wave of cheap, mass-produced hardware into a new market, wrote the checks without blinking. To make it work, Eclipse needed 3 things: a manufacturing revolution to cut costs, a new class of tiny turbofan engines to make the jet viable, and a customer base willing to absorb 1,000 airplanes a year. They got one of those things partly right, bodged the second, and the third was pure fantasy. The factory part actually worked. Traditional bizjet construction is slow, hands-on work. Frames, stringers, aluminum skins, and thousands of rivets per joint, driven by a small army with rivet guns. Eclipse threw all of that out and went with friction stir welding. Friction stir welding is basically pressing a fast-spinning metal tool along a joint until the 2 pieces of aluminum are rubbed and mashed into one continuous piece, instead of being held together with thousands of rivets. It got rid of roughly 7,400 rivets per airframe. This was the first FAA-approved use of friction stir welding, and it genuinely changed the industry. Airbus picked it up for A380 fuselage panels. Embraer used it on the legacy 450 and 500 forward fuselage. Eclipse proved it could be done on a whole airframe, and the majors quietly took notes. The airplane's bones were sound. The manufacturing worked. If the Eclipse story had been just an engineering story, it would be remembered as a triumph. It wasn't just an engineering story. Eclipse's business plan needed 500 to 1,000 jet deliveries per year to make the unit economics work. The stated break-even was initially around 500 aircraft annually, later revised to 750 per year to be comfortable. To understand how deranged that number is, you need one fact. In a strong year, the entire global business jet market delivers about 900 aircraft total, across every size and every OEM, from tiny CJs to Globals and Gulfstreams. The VLJ and light jet slice of that is a couple of hundred units in a good year. Eclipse was claiming it would by itself deliver as many or more airplanes per year as the entire rest of the light jet market combined. The justification came in layers, each one requiring you to accept the last on faith. Layer 1. There are millions of millionaires worldwide, and a jet under $1 million opens an entirely new buyer class. Layer 2. These aren't just private owners. Air taxi fleets will absorb hundreds of jets per year. Layer 3. NASA's Small Aircraft Transportation System research proves there's massive latent demand for point-to-point regional flying. Layer 4. At those volumes, supplier costs drop, fixed costs get spread thin, and the whole thing prints money. Each layer had just enough truth to sound clever. But the premise underneath all of it, that one startup could reliably shift 500-plus jets a year into a market that barely bought that many across all OEMs, had nothing to do with how business aviation actually works. There are tens of millions of millionaires worldwide, and only about 20,000 to 25,000 business jets in the entire global fleet. The gap between could theoretically afford it and actually signs for an airplane from a startup with no track record is enormous. Eclipse blurred people who could afford a jet with people who would buy this jet, and the venture capital crowd living in PowerPoint land rather than hangars nodded along. The pricing told the same story. Early marketing pitched under $1 million. The actual order price started around $775,000, climbed to $1 million by 2003, hit $1.3 million by 2006, and reached $2.1 million by 2008. At every step, Eclipse was chasing reality upward while the original dream receded. By the time the jet cost what a jet actually costs, the whole value proposition, cheap twin for the masses, had evaporated. So where were all those airplanes supposed to go? The answer, overwhelmingly, was one company, Dayjet. Dayjet was the brainchild of Ed Iacobucci, who'd co-founded Citrix Systems, another tech guy who looked at aviation and saw an industry begging to be disrupted. His idea was an on-demand per-seat jet taxi. You booked a seat, told them how flexible your timing was, and their software shuffled aircraft and passengers to make the trips work. Start in Florida in the Southeast, prove the model, then scale nationwide. Iacobucci raised about $61 million, took delivery of 28 Eclipse 500s, and had plans to grow the fleet to around 1,400 aircraft. The dependency ran both ways. Dayjet needed Eclipse to deliver cheap, reliable jets in quantity. Eclipse needed Dayjet to absorb hundreds of aircraft and justify the production volumes the business plan required. If one went down, the other story collapsed. Iacobucci's economics were knife-edge from the start. He said he needed roughly 50 aircraft on the line and another $40 million in funding to reach profitability. He had 28 jets, and every one of them needed to fly constantly. High utilization on a small fleet was the only way the per-seat pricing model closed. That made Dayjet not just Eclipse's biggest customer, but its most demanding one. Any delay, any missing feature, any grounded airplane hit Dayjet harder than it hit a private owner sitting in a hangar. Eclipse was about to let him down on all three counts. The first serious crack in the plan came from the engines. The Eclipse 500 was designed around the Williams EJ22, a tiny experimental turbofan whose low weight and fuel burn were central to the whole concept. The prototype flew once with EJ22s in 2002. Then the program died. Eclipse said the engine couldn't reliably make the required thrust. Williams said Eclipse wanted more than they'd specified. Either way, the relationship fell apart, and Eclipse had to find a new power plant. They went with the Pratt & Whitney PW610FA. It was a proven, certifiable engine, but it was heavier, thirstier, and meant a major airframe redesign. The integration work cost roughly 30 months of delay. The original 56 cents per nautical mile operating cost projections ballooned toward 89 cents. Weight went up, fuel burn went up, and the price crept upward again because you can't absorb an engine change without passing the cost along. The switch saved the airplane, but it killed any remaining chance that the Eclipse 500 would be meaningfully cheaper to buy or fly than existing light jets. By the time the PW610F was flying, the Eclipse was a normal VLJ. Just one from a company that had lost 3 years, burned through mountains of investor cash, and was now running late for the one customer whose entire fleet depended on timely delivery. Eclipse's second self-inflicted wound was the avionics. Instead of buying a proven Garmin or Honeywell stack, Eclipse built its own integrated system, Avio. The concept was ambitious. One digital backbone running both the avionics and the aircraft systems, which means fewer boxes, fewer wires, lower weight, and lower cost. On paper, it was Moore's Law applied to a cockpit. In practice, Avio wasn't ready when the jets were. Multiple delays around 2006-2007 were blamed on incomplete software, but Eclipse started pushing airplanes out the door anyway. Early Eclipse 500s shipped with missing features, incomplete FMS and autopilot capabilities, system functions that simply weren't there yet. The promise was that everything would be retrofitted later, at Eclipse's cost. In effect, they were selling each airplane twice, once to get it off the line, and again to bring it up to the spec they'd promised. For private owners, this was annoying. For Dayjet, it was crippling. Every retrofit campaign meant jets pulled from service. Every missing feature meant reduced capability on the line. Every grounded airplane punched a hole in fleet utilization, and for a business that depended on squeezing maximum revenue out of 28 jets, lost flying days meant lost revenue that could never be recovered. Dayjet later said outright that their operations suffered because Eclipse failed to install missing equipment or fix agreed technical discrepancies under the purchase contract. The one customer Eclipse couldn't afford to let down was being let down systematically on the factory floor. The avionics eventually matured into the capable system customers were originally promised, years too late, and long after Dayjet had paid the price. By mid-2008, Dayjet was still running only 28 aircraft instead of the 50 it needed to reach profitability, burning through cash while waiting for Eclipse to deliver a product that worked as advertised. Then the 2008 financial crisis hit. Credit markets froze. Iacobucci needed roughly $40 million in new funding to bridge to profitability. In any other year, that raise might have been difficult. In September 2008, it was impossible. On the 19th of September 2008, Dayjet abruptly ceased passenger operations. They grounded the fleet, laid off most staff, and blamed two things: the inability to secure funding in the financial crisis and problems with Eclipse delivering and fixing the jets. Iacobucci later said the credit crunch was the fatal blow. They needed $40 million and the money simply wasn't there. For Eclipse, Dayjet's death was not just the loss of a customer, it was the collapse of the entire argument. Those 1,400 planned aircraft, roughly 56% of Eclipse's total order book, evaporated overnight. The headline backlog that had justified the factory, the workforce, the supplier contracts, and the investor presentations was suddenly exposed for what it had always been: one fragile company's intention to buy jets it could never afford at volumes that were never realistic. Strip Dayjet out of the order book, and what's left? A few hundred individual owners and small operators, enough to keep a modest niche jet program going, but nowhere near enough to support a factory built to turn out 500 to 1,000 aircraft a year. The volume fantasy that held the entire business model together didn't just weaken, it ceased to exist. Eclipse filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy on the 25th of November 2008, revealing $700 million in unsecured claims. They had delivered 259 aircraft. They had been losing more than the selling price on every single one. By March 2009, the case was converted to Chapter 7 liquidation. Eclipse Aviation, as a going concern, was dead. The airplane itself, the clever friction stir-welded VLJ that genuinely advanced how we build metal airframes, survived. Roughly 300 Eclipse 500s and 550s are still flying today, supported by specialist outfits, with a quiet cult following among owner pilots who know what the jet actually is rather than what the company once promised it would be. But the business that was supposed to deliver cheap jets to the masses, reshape regional transport, and prove that Silicon Valley thinking could crack aviation, that burned through $1.5 billion and left behind a factory floor, a bankruptcy filing, and one unanswerable question. How did so many smart people look at an 800 jet-a-year market and convince themselves that one startup would need to build 1,000? The answer is the oldest one in business. They wanted it to be true, and in aviation, wanting is not enough. So that's it for today's video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. It goes a long way for us.